She looked me dead in the eyes and said, "I think we should open the relationship." And in that moment, I felt something I didn't expect: relief. Not because I wanted what she was offering, but because I finally understood that I'd been alone in this marriage for a very long time. That quote, right there. That's the line that stopped me cold when I first read this post, because it isn't the rage you'd expect. It isn't heartbreak in its rawest form. It's something quieter and, honestly, something far more devastating. That's the sound of a person who has already done their grieving. They just didn't know it yet. Welcome back. Today we're going deep into a story from Reddit's AITA community. And I want to be clear up front, this isn't just a divorce story. This is a masterclass in self-worth, in the slow erosion of identity inside a failing relationship, and ultimately, in what it looks like when someone finally chooses themselves. The original poster. Let's call him Marcus, because every man in a story like this deserves a name. Didn't come here looking for applause. He came here asking if he was the bad guy. And the answer the internet gave him, let's just say, was unanimous. But before we get to the fireworks, before we get to the open relationship conversation in the divorce and what comes after, we need to go back to the beginning. Because context is everything. And the beginning of Marcus's story is, on the surface, completely ordinary. And that, I'd argue, is exactly the point. Marcus met his wife, let's call her Diane, in their mid-20s the way a lot of people meet, through a mutual friend at a party, a shared laugh over something stupid. A phone number exchanged at the end of the night. By his own account, Diane was magnetic, funny, confident in a way that felt aspirational rather than intimidating. She knew what she wanted from her room, and somehow, for a while, what she wanted was Marcus. They dated for 2 years before getting engaged. Married a year after that. Marcus describes those early years as genuinely good. Not perfect, not cinematic, but good in the way that real life is good. Weekend brunches, shared playlists, inside jokes that only made sense to the two of them. He was building his career in logistics management. She was working in marketing for a mid-sized firm and, by his account, absolutely thriving. They bought a house at 29, a dog at 30, and Marcus, and this is important, so stay with me here, describes himself during this period as the kind of person who was completely oriented around the relationship. His social circle shrunk, his hobbies narrowed. He turned down promotions that required travel because Diane didn't like being alone. He framed all of this in the post without bitterness, almost matter-of-factly, like it was simply what you did when you love someone. Now, I want to pause here, because while Marcus is describing this quiet reshaping of the self around another person's needs and preferences, has a name. Psychologists call it identity foreclosure within a relationship context. It's when we abandon the exploration of our own desires and values in order to maintain harmony with a partner. We stop asking, what do I want? And we start asking, what keeps the peace? And here's the insidious part. It often doesn't feel like loss when it's happening. It feels like love. It feels like compromise. It feels like being a good partner. But underneath, there's a slow and quiet erosion happening. And one day, you look up and realize you've been so busy tending to someone else's world that you forgot to build your own. But as we're about to see, Marcus's self-erasure wasn't happening in a vacuum. There were signs. Small ones at first, the kind that are easy to rationalize, that Diane was not investing in the marriage the way he was. The first red flag, and I want to walk through these carefully because each one matters, came about 4 years into the marriage. Marcus had planned a weekend trip for their anniversary. Not extravagant. A cabin a few hours out, hiking, a dinner reservation. He'd organized it months in advance. Diane, 1 week before the trip, mentioned casually, that she'd agreed to attend a work conference that same weekend. She said it like she'd forgotten, Marcus writes. But the conference had been scheduled for months. She didn't think to check what we had planned. I want you to sit with that for a second. This is not a catastrophic betrayal. This is not a smoking gun. On its own, it's a scheduling conflict. But here's why I'm flagging it. His reaction in the moment was to cancel the cabin, eat the deposit, and tell her it was fine. And she, by his account, did not apologize. She said, "Thank you for being so understanding," and moved on. No reschedule was ever suggested. Their anniversary came and went unmarked. The second incident happened the following year. Marcus's father was diagnosed with early-stage Parkinson's. He writes that he was devastated and scared, and that when he tried to talk to Diane about it, she listened for about 10 minutes before pivoting the conversation to a problem she was having with a coworker. He didn't bring it up again with her. He called his brother instead. Now, this is where it gets genuinely concerning to me. Because what Marcus just described, reaching for your partner in a moment of grief and finding a wall, is one of the most quietly damaging experiences a person can have inside a marriage. Dr. John Gottman, one of the foremost researchers on relationship stability, talks about something he calls bids for connection. A bid is any attempt, large or small, to reach toward your partner emotionally. And the research is clear how a partner responds to those bids is one of the most reliable predictors of whether a relationship will survive. Turning away from bids, especially during moments of vulnerability, is corrosive. And it was happening to Marcus repeatedly, systematically, for years. The third red flag came wrapped in a compliment, which is honestly the most confusing kind. Diane began making comments about Marcus's appearance and social confidence, but framed in a way that positioned him as somehow less than. "You're such a homebody," she'd say, not affectionately, but like it was a flaw. "You should really make more of an effort when we go out." When Marcus pushed back once, gently, asking what she meant, she told him he was being too sensitive. Wait, I need to stop here. Because that specific word sensitive, deployed in response to legitimate feedback, that's textbook gaslighting. And I want to take a moment to explain what gaslighting actually is, because it gets thrown around a lot and it deserves precision. Gaslighting is a form of psychological manipulation in which a person causes someone else to question their own perceptions, memories, and emotional reality. It doesn't require malice. Sometimes it's a learned defensive behavior, but the effect is identical regardless of intent. The target begins to distrust their own instincts. They start prefacing their feelings with, "Maybe I'm wrong," but they apologize for having needs. Marcus, by his own admission, started doing exactly this. The fourth incident is the one that made me put the post down and stare at the wall for a minute. About 6 years into the marriage, Marcus discovered, by accident, through a shared tablet, that Diane had been maintaining a close texting relationship with a man from her gym. The texts weren't explicitly romantic, but they were intimate in tone. Lots of inside jokes. References to conversations Marcus wasn't aware she'd had. When he brought it up, Diane's response was immediate and surgical. "You went through my phone?" The conversation became about Marcus's alleged breach of privacy. The content of the text was never addressed. Marcus apologized. He apologized. And that right there, that moment of apologizing for the discovery rather than addressing what was discovered, is a perfect encapsulation of a concept called the Darvo response. Deny, attack, reverse victim, and offender. It's a manipulation tactic in which someone accused of wrongdoing flips the script and positions themselves as the real victim. It's enormously effective against people who are already predisposed to self-doubt. And Marcus, after years of having his feelings minimized, was primed for exactly this kind of reversal. But as we're about to see, even all of this was only prelude. The conversation happened on a Tuesday. Marcus remembers the day specifically. He'd had a good week at work. A project he'd led had come in under budget, and his manager had praised him publicly in a team meeting. He came home in genuinely good spirits. Diane was already home, and she'd made dinner, which he noted was unusual. They ate. They talked about small things. And then, over the last of the wine, Diane looked at him and said she wanted to talk about something. She'd clearly prepared, Marcus writes. She had talking points. I realize that now. She was calm, almost clinical. She said she'd been doing a lot of thinking, and she believed that our relationship had become too constrictive. She said she felt like she wasn't able to fully explore who she was becoming. She said she thought an open relationship might give them both the freedom to grow. Marcus writes that he didn't yell. He didn't storm out. He asked a single question. "Is there someone specific you want to be with?" Diane said no. He didn't believe her, and based on what came later, he was right not to. He told her he needed to think. She seemed surprised by this, as if she'd anticipated either immediate agreement or immediate explosion, and his measured response had disoriented her. He went for a walk. He came back, and, in the quiet of their kitchen, he told her clearly and without drama, "I don't want an open relationship. And I think if you're asking for one, we have a much bigger problem than we've been admitting." She asked him what he meant. He said, "I mean, I want a divorce." Now, I want to pause here, because what Marcus did in that moment is psychologically remarkable, and it's worth acknowledging. He did not negotiate. He did not try to win her back. He did not collapse into the sunk cost fallacy, which is the deeply human tendency to continue investing in something simply because you've already invested so much, regardless of whether that investment is serving you. The sunk cost fallacy keeps people in jobs they hate, stocks that are tanking, and yes, marriages that have been quietly dying for years. It whispers, but we've already put so much in. If we leave now, it was all for nothing. Marcus, in that moment, heard that whisper and rejected it. He recognized, perhaps instinctively, that time already spent is gone regardless of what you do next. The only question is whether the time ahead serves you. He filed for divorce within the month. What followed was what Marcus describes as the reveal. And this is where I put on my detective hat, because the sequence of events that unfolded after he filed is deeply illuminating. Within 2 weeks of his filing, mutual friends began reaching out to Marcus, not to check on him, to report what Diane was saying about him. According to Diane's version of the events, Marcus had been emotionally distant for years, had never supported her ambitions, and had blindsided her with the divorce because he couldn't handle her growth. She was positioning herself as the victim of a checked-out husband. Marcus, to his credit, responded to almost none of it. He let the narrative exist. He focused on the legal process. Then, approximately 6 weeks post-filing, the man from the gym, the one from the text Diane had dismissed, posted a photo on social media. A vacation photo. He and Diane together at a beach resort. It had been taken the previous week. So Diane had told Marcus during the open relationship conversation that there was no one specific she wanted to be with. She filed no counter-argument to the divorce. She had immediately transitioned into a relationship with someone else, and she was now framing herself publicly as a woman who had been failed by an emotionally unavailable husband. I honestly, look, I've read a lot of these stories, and I still find myself taken aback by the sheer architectural precision of this kind of narrative manipulation. Because what Diane appears to have done is construct an exit strategy, present the open relationship proposal as a reasonable conversation, position Marcus's refusal as rigidity, and then move into a waiting relationship while maintaining plausible deniability. Whether this was conscious or semi-conscious doesn't much matter. The effect on Marcus was the same, and this is where I need to introduce the concept of a dark triad behavioral pattern. Not to diagnose anyone because I'm a narrator, not a clinician, but because the pattern is worth understanding. Dark triad traits include narcissism, an inflated sense of self-importance, Machiavellianism, a tendency to manipulate others for personal gain, and psychopathy, reduced empathy and emotional coldness. Individuals who exhibit these traits don't necessarily present as villains. In fact, they often present as charming, confident, and entirely reasonable, until their interests diverge from yours, at which point the mask shifts. And suddenly you're looking back over years of small moments and wondering how you missed it. Marcus didn't miss it because he was naive. He missed it because he was trusting. There's a profound difference. The divorce was finalized approximately 8 months after Marcus filed. The asset split was handled by mediation. He kept the house, he contributed more to the mortgage and could demonstrate it. The dog stayed with him. Diane moved into an apartment, and then something unexpected happened. Marcus, for the first time in nearly a decade, had space. Actual, unstructured, no one else's preferences to manage space. And he discovered, slowly, somewhat disbelievingly, in the way you discover a room in a house you've lived in for years, that he had interests. Genuine ones. He started running. He reconnected with friends he hadn't seen in years. He took the promotion he previously declined. He started cooking elaborate meals on weekends, not for anyone, just because he wanted to. He writes, with a kind of quiet wonder that I found genuinely moving, I didn't realize how much of my energy had been going toward managing her moods, her needs, her narrative. When I stopped, I had so much left over. I didn't know what to do with it at first. Then I figured it out. Within 18 months of the divorce, Marcus had been promoted twice. He lost weight, not because he tried, but because he was sleeping better and no longer stress eating through difficult evenings. He was, by every measurable standard, thriving. Diane, by the accounts of mutual acquaintances, was not. The relationship with the gym man had ended within a few months. She'd left her job after a conflict with management. She reached out to Marcus twice, once to check in, and once to suggest that ended things too hastily. He did not respond to either message. And look, this is the part of the story where I want to be careful, because it would be easy to frame this as Marcus winning and Diane losing, and I don't think that's the right lens. What I think this actually illustrates is something much more important, that relationships built on one person's sustained self-erasure and another person's sustained self-centeredness are not sustainable. Eventually, the person doing the erasing runs out of self to give, and when they reclaim it, when they finally choose themselves, the architecture of the relationship collapses, because it was built entirely on their willingness to disappear. Marcus posted his story asking if he was the a-hole for divorcing her and thriving. The Reddit community, thousands of people said the same thing in different words. Not only are you not the bad guy, you are the cautionary tale that so many people needed to see. So what do we take from all this? I think about Marcus not as a victim, because he ultimately refused that role, but as someone who illustrates the quiet danger of love without reciprocity. He gave generously, consistently, and for years. He gave up travel, ambition, social connection. He did it because he thought that was what love required. And no one around him, no friend, no therapist, no cultural script, handed him a mirror and said, look, this isn't love. This is maintenance. You are maintaining a relationship that has stopped maintaining you. The moment Diane asked for an open relationship, she handed him that mirror. And instead of shattering, Marcus looked into it. And what he saw was enough. He saw a man who'd been holding his breath for 9 years. And then, at 35, in the kitchen of a house he'd once compromised everything to keep, he finally exhaled. if there's one thing I want you to carry out of this story, it's this. Thriving after a difficult ending isn't revenge. It isn't spite. It isn't something you should have to apologize for or qualify. It is simply what happens when a person is no longer spending all their energy holding something broken together. Marcus didn't win because Diane lost. Marcus won because he finally, after far too long, decided to play for himself. And that, in the end, is never something to ask forgiveness for.